Good to be with you again. You know, usually when a saint is canonized, the Pope sets the feast day for the day that that person died, entered into eternal life. But when Pope Francis canonized Pope John the 23rd, he decided, no, the date for his feast would be October 11th, the day that the Second Vatican Council opened. Yes, that was a very decisive moment in the history of our church. Giuseppe Roncalli was one of 11 children born to a poor farming family up in northern Italy. He was ordained at 23 and gradually was called into the Vatican service of the diplomatic corps and became a representative of the Holy See in Bulgaria and then Turkey and Greece. And after 1944, when the war ended, he was appointed to be the nuncio to France. And later in 53, he was made the Patriarch of Venice in northern Italy, and then Cardinal. And when Pope Pius XII died in 1958, the cardinals elected Giuseppe Roncalli as the new pope, and he chose the name, to everyone's surprise, John the 23rd. It had not been used for many years. He was 78 years of age when he was elected, and many said, oh, well, he's just sort of a temporary pope. The cardinals haven't decided which way they're going to lead the church. He won't do very much. Well, to their surprise, in January of 59, at an ecumenical service in St. Paul's outside the walls of Rome, he announced that he was going to have a synod of the Diocese of Rome, and he created a commission to begin to revise the whole canon law of the church, which had been adapted in 1917. And to much surprise, he declared, I'm going to call an ecumenical council, all of the bishops of the world together here in the Vatican. And we're told that some of the cardinals who were with him there, the Roman curial cardinals, looked at others and, in surprise and said, what? Why do we need a council? Everything's fine. Oh, we'll just do things slow, and very slow, and reverse in our usual way of slowing things down. But Pope John the 23rd would not be slowed down. He kept pushing. And so inquiries were put out to all the bishops of the world, all Catholic universities, seminaries, to get suggestions of what should the council do, what should it address. And some 70 documents were being prepared for the bishops when they would come to Rome. And so he set the date for the grand solemn opening of the council, the 21st in the history of the church, for October 11th. And in his opening speech made clear that yes, in the past very often councils had condemned people, heretics and such. But no, in this day, no. The church would seek to present itself as the mother of all peoples, with compassion, forgiveness, the mercy of Christ. And of course, many of the curial cardinals had prepared things, and they had prepared that there would have to be different commissions set up to address the various topics. And they had bishops from different countries named to be on these committees. So at the first session, Cardinal Frings of Cologne, Germany said, not so fast. We've just come together. We've just gotten to know one another. We need a few days to get to know each other and decide who we want to put on these commissions. The council agreed. Cardinal Frings, of course, had brought with him a young priest to be his counselor, theologian, He later became Pope Benedict XVI. And so the council opened, and I just have this memorial book. Here is a good view of the council in session. The bishops all in white robes. There was a liturgical celebration, and there's the high altar of St. Peter's. And here are some balconies where those priests, experts and such could be gathered. And behind these stands on either side are a couple of coffee bars for the bishops in case they felt a need for some drink there during the sessions. These stands were set up, 2,000 bishops. We never had that many bishops in a council before. The last council had been in 1869-70, the First Vatican Council, and it had adopted the doctrine on the infallibility of the Pope. But it never really was completed because at that time, Italy had been divided into a number of dukedoms and princedoms and republics. And finally, in 1869-70, they began to come together as one nation of Italy. And so when those forces moved into Rome, the council ended and all the bishops went home. And when I was a kid, I know we always read about the council might be prorogued, put off, as it were, in a long recess. Well, they decided, no, it's been 70 years, so we'll start a new council. And there were 7 documents that were very ready for the bishops to consider. And Pope John suggested they begin by taking up the doctrine of the Constitution on the liturgy. When I think of it now, up to that point, in most Catholic parishes, people gathered in quiet. Maybe some prayed the rosary, some prayed in missals, but everyone was very quiet, no singing, no responding. Leave a couple of altar boys to say responses in Latin. And yes, for about 100 years, there was percolating in the church a movement to renew the liturgy. And rightly did the Pope say, yeah, that's a good starting point, because it's in the celebration of the liturgy that Catholics actually learn to be church. We are the church when we gather with the priest ordained or bishop designated to represent Christ the head, but the congregation is indeed the body of Christ. Well, none of the bishops had ever been in a council, obviously. So things went along. They would present a document, and there was an initial vote. Is this document worth considering? Usually they said yes, but one of the most decisive moments came when the document on Revelation was presented. And the bishops voted to send it back and be redrawn completely because it reflected too much the attitude ever since the Protestant Reformation of Catholics against Protestants. And the bishops wanted to break down those walls to make it possible for us to come together with other Christians. When they would take an initial vote, they would decide then by chapters, shall we take this up? Should we approve it? And the bishops always had 3 choices in voting. They could vote placet, it pleases, yes. Non-placet, no. Or placet, juxta modem. They could say, yes, but take this out, add this, change this. Don't we wish we had that option in our elections? So that's how 2,000 bishops composed the documents of the council. They would bring it up, they would get discussion, recommendations for changes, go back to the committee, and they'd take up another document. And they'd come back again, And so the number in favor might rise from 900 to now 1,300 to now 1,700 to finally almost always about 2,000 bishops in favor. Always there were a few, 20, 15, who would be opposed. And that's how the council adopted its documents. This is the book of the documents of the Second Vatican Council. 4 that are called constitutions, the main documents, on the church in the modern world, on the liturgy of the church, and finally, the document on Revelation. And in addition to those 4 major documents, then there are 9 decrees where the bishops took the parts of the Constitution and applied it to bishops, to priests, to priestly formation, to religious, to the laity, to the Eastern churches, to communications, to the missions. These were the 9 decrees of the council. And then there were 3 others that are called declarations, one on education, one on the non-Christians, and one on religious freedom. And so these are the documents that the council adopted, and on the last day when the Pope, and by now Pope John the 23rd, he had begun the council in October 1958, he died in June the 3rd, and the council had ended its session in December. And you can imagine, as the bishops debated a couple of documents, they got through maybe 3 documents. And I'm sure many of them were thinking, at this rate, we'll be here 100 years. What are we doing? And all the work was piling up back in the home diocese, waiting for me to get home. And one day it was decided that 3 cardinals would speak. In all of the council sessions, bishops were limited to 10 minutes maximum. And all the things were in Latin. Cardinal Cushing of Boston had offered to pay for an installation of a system so that everyone could hear the translation in their own language, but that was vetoed. And so on this one day in November, the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, Giovanni Montini, spoke, followed by 2 other cardinals. And they outlined, this is what the council is really all about. Cardinal Montini said, we are the leaders of the churches throughout the world, and we are here reflecting on what does it mean to be the Church of Jesus Christ here in the 20th century. What do we need to do to make the church more in accord with what Jesus wants? All agreed, yes, this is it. Now we know what we're doing. Now we reduce all these documents. Eventually there would be, as I said, the 16. And now we know what the thrust of things is. So we send things back to committee. We'll end the council first session here in December the 8th, and we'll go home, and people will do their homework, and we'll come back next year. And of course, when Pope John the 23rd died in June, the cardinals then elected Cardinal Montini as the new Pope, Pope Paul VI. And so he led the council through the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th sessions. And at the very end, in a great mass celebrating the conclusion, Pope Paul began his homily with the words, "Now the council begins." And I've often thought, all those bishops had their bags packed back at the hotel or the seminary where they were staying. They were all ready to get on the plane, a railroad or whatever, to take them back home to their work. And he's saying, now it's beginning. But he knew, drawing up those documents, that was the easy part. Now to translate that into life in every diocese, in every parish, that's the challenge. Each year, Bishop Heil had come back from the council and held a meeting with the priest to bring us up to date on what he remembered and understood from the council session. And at the end of the council then, 3 other priests and I went to Bishop Heil with a suggestion that he invite all the priests to take the documents of the council, and we'd give them all a paperback edition, prayerfully read it. They would even be dispensed from the praying of the breviary if they spent 30 minutes studying prayerfully the council document. And we provided a list of some things that they might want to talk about. A whole page. First, the bishop's relationship with his priests, priest's relationship with other priests, rectory conditions, the laity, and sort of ideals about the priesthood. And as a result of that, we priests were gathered in 4 peer groups. I was obviously in the youngest group and was chosen to be the chairperson. And we came up with a 27-page report. The next higher group had a 17-page report. The next highest had maybe 8 pages, and the oldest group had a 3-page report. And each group then elected 4 representatives, and we met in the basement of Christ our King Rectory. It began November the 30th, 1967, and continued through December and January, 8 meetings of 5 hours each. And yes, they were very, as they would say, very frank discussions. A lot of people didn't like some of the proposed changes, but we knew what we needed to do, and the bishop then took all this under advisement in his own way. I know people were somewhat concerned because February came and went, March came and went. Finally, in May, the bishop announced his decisions. And we realized Bishop Heil was a very introverted man. So he would ask people for their advice, and then he would go into his chapel in his home there on 17th Street, and he would pray and make his decisions. That's how he made appointments. And Monsignor Shears put all these recommendations that we had developed on poster board, so he could go in the chapel and before the Blessed Sacrament make his decision. And very often he turned things around from being a negative, like every priest must be back in the rectory by a certain time. There were certain parishes that had curfews. I remember even Bishop Sartorelli saying when he was a young priest, there was a curfew in his parish up in Jersey, and when he would sneak in late at night, the pastor would call him on the carpet and say, you're supposed to be in by 9 o'clock. But the meetings went on to 10. So the bishop took a lot of those things and made them into a positive, that priests would recognize the need to have enough rest, and so they would be able to perform their duties properly. And so then, after the document was issued in May then the bishop began to enforce the decisions. One of them was that pastors would be limited to 10 years. Another that associate pastors will be limited to 5 years. And so in June and then again in September, all these changes were made. And obviously the bishop began to move those of us who had been rather outspoken into one-on-one with pastors who were difficult. And so it was that the Church of Wilmington began to experience the renewal implemented by Pope St. John the 23rd, carried on by Pope St. Paul VI, the whole Vatican Council. And this year was the 60th anniversary of the Council. And as I reflect on it now, my whole life, my whole ministry, and even beginning in the seminary, has been wrapped up with that work of the Council, to try to translate it into action with the help of hundreds and thousands of members of the Church in different ways, liturgical, educational, everything, to make the Church in our diocese, in our parish, be what Jesus Christ wants it to be. So we keep on working to renew this ancient Church of ours, ancient but always new. God bless you and your loved ones.